Hello everyone and welcome back to House, the Shared Living podcast. It's our 80th episode today, which I still can't believe we've got to the ripe old age of 80, but it is, so thank you for continuing to listen. We did think it was our 79th, but time flies when you're having fun, and we actually did a recount. So apologies if it looks like we've skipped one. We haven't, we just can't count. But we can now, so that's good. We are all back after our very busy trip to Lisbon for the class conference. Thanks again to Kellyanne and the team for a wonderful conference. We had a great time and really great to hang out with colleagues across the sector. And of course, we're delighted to be back bringing you the latest news and views from across the shared living sector, including a very special Ask the Expert segment about the Renters' Rights Act with Amanda McNeil from Howard Kennedy. So stay tuned for more on that later, which is an important part of changes that are occurring in the sector. But first, introductions. I'm Deanie Lee from the Property Marketing Strategists.
I'm Dan Smith from Resi Consultancy and Verbaflow AI.
And I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And first, a quick word from our headline sponsor.
Season 5 of Housed, sponsored by mystudenttools.com. List your properties commission-free and reach thousands of students searching for their university home.
Dan and the team from My Student Halls have been supporters of House since the beginning, and we are incredibly grateful that they're here once again as headline sponsors of Season 5. Most of you working in PBSA are in the process of launching your leasing season, so if you aren't yet listed on My Student Halls, make sure you do get in contact with Dan and ensure you are visible. Also, a big, huge thank you to Washstation Utopia for coming back and sponsoring House once again. We'll hear from them later. We do usually say this at the end, but if you are enjoying House, please share the episodes with your colleagues and network. And if you could give us a review on your podcast channel of choice, we would really appreciate it. The wider the reach, the more conversations can happen that can move the sector forward. And that includes at UK REEF in May 2026. Media packs have now been sent out to everyone that expressed an interest. So if you want to partner and get your brand in front of the key players in the real estate sector and you haven't received a media pack, do get in touch. Now we shall get on with the show. As I mentioned, we've all come back from Lisbon on Friday. We probably don't need to speak about that very long queue for passport control that we all found very painful, but we did get through it and we did get back. But how did we find a class? You know, what was our insights? What did we learn?
I think Dan is probably better placed to feedback on what was going on his stage, because Deanie and I, we were hosting the community hub stage all day, which was amazing. But the content that we had on our stage was more operational, more discussion based, more kind of troubleshooting across various different departments of the sector. So we were probably less privy to kind of the news and insight from the wider kind of European sector. So, yeah, Dan, what's your feedback?
Well, we all love this event. It is, I think, because we all get to travel as well, so that certainly helps to get people into new places. And I think this year was arguably the best yet. Obviously, Lisbon is a fantastic city, but it just felt like there was some kind of, I want to say renewed optimism, but I actually think it's more realism across the sector. I've just put a post up about that on LinkedIn before we started recording, because that's what I'm being asked all the time. Every single call that I'm having, whether it's a Verbaflow demo or a general consultancy call, is, oh, what was the sentiment? Like, what were people thinking? How are people feeling about PBSA in the UK and Europe? And I think it's realistic, and I think that was I was hosting the Catalyst stage, which I was really pleased with, because it's the one where you should have actions to take away from that. Like, that should be really impacting the sector in a positive way. So I think Thule from Student Crowd and Paul, and then Dan Swan and Caroline from Student Roost, they did a really interesting panel on the lessons that Europe could learn from the UK. Now, I think we're quite often a little bit arrogant in the UK about, well, it's UK and Europe when it comes to PBSA, but you know, Thule did a really good job of saying, look, this should be broken out by every single country now. And then Osborne Clark, the lawyers who took the graveyard shift, which is a terrible place to put 5 lawyers on stage just before everyone's desperate to go to the bar, said exactly the same thing, that, you know, we really have to start treating Europe as separate countries now. But I think some of the lessons that can be learned from the UK are already being learned. There is a more realistic and almost a more cautious approach to development in PBSA in Europe, from what we're seeing, and that the Student Crowd data kind of backs that up as well. And I think there's a real focus on how not to make the mistakes of certain cities that appear to be oversupplied. Now, I don't necessarily think they are oversupplied, whether you're talking about Sheffield or Nottingham or Coventry or wherever else. I think they're at different cycles of different stages in the cycle of maturity. And I think that there's a real focus on how we can make sure that we drive affordable accommodation. That was clear. And the only way to do that is by building more. So I think that some of the key threads were affordability and flexibility. On the Catalyst stage, there was a bit of a focus on tech. We had Yardi on stage. Yardi sponsor the event, and so they were on stage talking about AI, which Maggie did a great job. Actually, she did a really good job of walking us through where Yardi are up to with AI for each of their clients. But obviously, I was sat there going, I'm desperate to put my hand up here. I'm desperate to be on that stage and talking about what the real world impact is, not just for specific clients of a PMS, but for across the board. So I had to sit on my hands and bite my tongue during that. But I think AI wasn't mentioned too much because I think some of these events can be a little bit overkill. So one quick mention of AI, a decent session from Meggie, and then we just had the Verberflow booth set up just off of the dining area. So yeah, overall, I think it was, I caught the Catalyst stage primarily, but some of the other sessions that I did see were just very realistic. I think people have stopped drinking the Kool-Aid when it comes to what agents are saying and where to build and what to buy, and I do think that investors are being a lot more realistic. So I was really positive. I didn't feel like I was swimming against the tide in some of the things that I was saying on the stage or to clients or whatever, because I do get accused of being bearish at times, and yeah, I am on certain markets and definitely on certain assets if you're going to price them wrong, or they're not in the right location or not the right amenities or services, etc. But overall, just really good to see some realism, and I think long may that continue. Hopefully it's feeding through into the pricing that we're seeing being set for this year, because we do need to cancel the cashbacks. If I can get something trending, cancel the cashbacks. We don't want to see those again this year. And all of the operators that I spoke to were saying that they'd had a flying start. They'd done, they'd launched their prices, not necessarily reasonably early, but in October and obviously into early November. And they'd actually had a concerted rebooking campaign. And I think this is the first time where, for clients of mine, we've not had any pushback from investors who have basically been saying in previous years, we don't want to give any extra discounts to rebookers. Let's just, let's just give them maybe £100 cashback or something. And then further down the line, obviously they're gazumped by the massive cashbacks that might be on offer. So I think that there are better rebooker offers out there so this could be, but I'm going to call it now. I'm hoping that this is the year of the rebooker. So, anyone who's doing quite well, it does seem to be that they've got their rebooking campaigns done well. Sarah, what did you think?
Regarding the class conference, yeah, I mean, I love the event, and Deanie and I are asked to help support the team on their tours and hosting the community stage, and we love that. It's great to meet so many fantastic presenters and speakers and the audience. I mean, for some of our sessions, we didn't have enough seats. We've requested more next year. Because such is the demand for these community hubs. And the community hubs are an extension of the virtual hubs that we talked about on one of the podcast episodes with the class conference, with the Class Foundation over the summer. So this is kind of bringing it in real life. So a lot of those people had met virtually before and have been part of these hubs, which is fantastic. And hopefully they will continue those relationships through the year. And for me, I mean, I've been posting about the key takeaways and the content on LinkedIn this week, but I think for me, what we saw in every session was once it ended, people carried on the conversations. They didn't move away from the stage, and that's what it's all about, really. It's those conversations.
I totally agree. I mean, kudos to Kellyanne and Frank and the entire team at the class conference. It really is fantastic, and I think the layout really helps. The fact that it's headphones also helps, because you don't feel like you need to be quiet in a a dusty old ballroom. They're always pretty innovative in terms of where they hold it, and it's sort of silent disco format, if anyone hasn't actually been. But you're right, it's those conversations that were happening straight away after. And I think what they've done is really good. Yes, of course, you have to give the sponsors airtime. Verberflow was also a sponsor, just to put that out there now. And who knows, I may have been drafted in to do the to host the Catalyst stage, but I think it helped that Verberflow sponsored as well. It did not help me. I did not have any time to do to do demos, but still, I think what they're doing really well at the Class Foundation is politics. So I think that how focused they are on improving policy and standards for the industry across Europe in particular is pioneering. And I think Kellyanne brings that because she's got that experience with Unipol. Obviously, that's definitely helping there. But the way they're organising, it's not just a big party in a European city anymore. And I think it's really fulfilling those goals that Frank and Charlie originally had back in the day when they founded this. And the last session was just brilliant, absolutely brilliant, on policy and what the next step is for student housing within Europe, with the new European student housing policy that Class Foundation are really trying to push. I have to say a quick shout out to Romy as well, who Romy Levin, who just did an incredible job. It's like she's been on stage all her life. I reckon she's had some kind of acting training at some point, but she was incredibly natural helping to host the day. And your sessions had rave reviews, and I went to take a few photos. I've got a few photos actually. I haven't shared them with you yet. I should have done, but yeah, it was standing room only. So yeah, well done to you guys on curating that and hosting that, because it clearly really worked. So yeah, I think it's a great formula. It's a brilliant event. It's well worth going to Amsterdam next year. That was the big announcement. So yeah, I think get your tickets in as soon as possible. Deanie, what did you think?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said, and just wanted to say about the community hubs. I think it comes across in everything that Class does. It is fully inclusive, and everyone's got a voice. And I think what the community hub, the community stage does is enables everyone to have that voice. And we had feedback across the day from all the different hubs that the team kind of hosted and facilitated and worked through. And that's great, because it is a collaborative sector. Everyone wants to bring it forward, and everyone has a view in that and how we do that. So I think that was the really great thing around being part of that community hub stage, is that whoever you are, whatever you do, you can come and share your views and have a discussion and build on all our kind of insights and learnings across the sector. And I think that also goes into actually just the general feeling that you get when you go to class. As Sarah said, we were facilitating the community stage, so we were there all day. So actually we didn't really, full disclosure, get to see any of the other kind of stages or insights or learn anything, but you get that through osmosis. I think because everyone's in the same room, there's not a closed off room with doors that people can go to. So when you're having those conversations, those conversations are following on from what other people have learned in that stage, other conversations they've had. And I think even it's always been about networking. I think that's always been why I've really liked it, because it feels easy to network. It feels friendly. I think it probably helps that the UK sector is not in the UK and we're all in a different country, and it kind of lightens the mood. But I think it was even more so this year. And I think what I found really good was that networking was completely, there was no hierarchy in there. There wasn't a operators, developers, investors and suppliers. It was very much a view that actually we're all part of the same sector. We're all stakeholders in each other's business. And actually, if we all work together, we can make improvements for the greater good of the entirety of all of us. And I think that came across more so than ever before, really. But yeah, I think it's one of my favourite conferences. I think if you haven't been before, you should do. And I think that inclusiveness, and I think Kellyanne said before the conference happened, I think 56% of speakers were women speakers. And I think that shows that everything, that threads through classes about inclusion and making sure everyone gets to speak and have their voice and share their insights.
Every single person on stage was utterly credible and deserved to be there and was adding massive value. And I think that's, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. And genuinely, the only negative feedback was Lisbon Airport, but we don't need to go into that. Yeah, it was genuinely. I'm still very jaded from it because I haven't had much to drink in a year, and this isn't like it doesn't have to be a big boozy affair. There are lots of people there not really drinking. I only had a few drinks, but unlimited wine at the awards do. Yeah, I woke up and I was struggling a bit. So I think to pull me out of my funk in the morning to help me host the Catalyst stage, it was just really good to see everyone there being so positive, really enjoying it, and yeah, I am really looking forward to Amsterdam next year for sure.
Definitely. No, it was a great conference. And if you want to be part of community hubs as well, please do go onto the Cards Foundation website and find out more about that, because it is a great network to be part of. And yes, if you are not already thinking about going to Amsterdam next year, please make you do. And a public service announcement for everyone: if you do go to Lisbon, leave yourself about 3 or 4 hours to get through passport security. 2 hours is not enough unless you want to be completely un-British and push in, which we all had to do, which we all feel guilty about. So that is a piece of advice for you all there. So before we carry on, we'll have a quick word from one of our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Utopia, the smart building platform that helps real estate owners protect the value of their assets.
From ESG compliance to energy efficiency and resident engagement, Utopia turns real-time data into action, making buildings better for people, planet, and profit.
If you're in asset management or operations and care about performance, Utopia is your essential partner. Find out more at utopia.co.uk. That's utopi.co.uk.
And thank you once again to Utopia for continuing to support House. We do really appreciate your support and engagement. So we've got a piece of research that was issued by St James Place around financial advice for parents. And in that, it was discovered that the greatest fear for parents being surveyed is that their children will never own a home. 40% of parents now believe their children will never achieve this traditional cornerstone of financial security. And a third think their children may need to live with them as adults or move back home. I guess the question for us is what we've discussed before is there enough knowledge of BTR? Is there enough knowledge that actually they can go and rent somewhere and not have that risk of being kicked out? And does it matter, or is it not about rent security, but having an asset? So what were your thoughts on the piece of research?
I mean, we have discussed this before, and my view is, and I will keep talking about it, is we need to take the pressure away from young people about home ownership. And if 40% of parents believe their children will never achieve this traditional cornerstone of financial security, are they talking about it all the time? Are they putting pressure on their children for that? I was discussing it with my partner last night, actually. I was saying, I do not want our kids, love them, but I don't want our kids living with us until they're 40 because they're saving for a deposit for a house. I want them to be using that money to go and live, to go and enjoy somewhere, to go and rent somewhere, wherever they want to be, and not have that financial burden of saving for a deposit over their head, because it probably will take until they're 40 unless any young people are fortunate enough to inherit money or have some kind of trust fund or something. But for the vast majority, it's just not going to be a reality, and we need to reframe it. It's not a failure. Renting is not second best. Yeah, and I do wonder about that. I don't have the answer, but I was thinking, if more of the public knew what a great thing BTR brought to the sector, that it's well managed, it's secure, that maybe that would shift people's views of renting, because renting has had negative connotations, and for some of it quite rightly, hence the Renters' Rights Act. But actually that is changing, and we need way more positive PR about renting.
I think that is where RE UK and a specific rental body within that, or the Association for Rental Living will help. It's on them to really be singing the praises of renting. We have to change hearts and minds to the fact that renting isn't a dirty word, and therefore that landlords aren't, I was going to say aren't dirty, but that landlord isn't a dirty word. I I don't think enough is done in that sense. But maybe this is a chance for co-living to really come together. There's, a new co-living body as well, and BTR, and really state the case. But I think with a honestly a decent PR campaign, I just think that would go a long way. So yeah, write the reports, the white papers, make sure the news stories are out there, get a decent PR campaign behind renting as a concept. And I think that will start to change things. It's the same with later living. We've spoken to Honor Barrett in the past, and more recently I spoke with Marcus Hodges, both from Birchgrove, a later living rental operator, where we know that will definitely benefit the housing system to have more seniors in rented accommodation and assisted living in that sense. So I do think we have to throw away any kind of baggage that we have and legacy of, renting being the sort of renting being the poor person's option. To be completely honest, I was trying to dance around words there, but actually, I think that's what people think. Well, okay, you can't afford your own home, therefore you have to rent and pay off someone else's mortgage. And I think that's the major issue that we've got. It is a PR problem. We need to learn from Europe and start thinking about how we can increase the rental economy.
Agree. I mean, it's marketing communications, and it's all what I said about class is that actually it's about the sector coming together and actually realizing we're all stakeholders in the same message, and we've got to work to sell that message. And I think it's similar to what we discussed with Brendan when he was on Housed a few weeks ago, is that everyone needs to rent at some point in their lives. There's very, very few people. There's a kind of elite people that can go from a home to a home they own. Most people have to rent at some point in their lives. And I think this idea that it's one or the other, that actually renting is a part of life, and maybe life changes happens and you might decide to buy, but actually renting can be that long-term thing. It doesn't have to be, oh, I'm renting now and that's my only options. You just, at that point in your life, if that's what you're doing, and you can stay there as long as you want. So I think we just need to, change the narrative around homes. And I think it comes down to also that, one of the lessons that we've learned in PBSA is that we probably haven't educated students enough about housing options when they go off to university. And I think that extends across all housing options, that actually there isn't enough education around types of housing, where you can live, how you can fund that, how that works, which I guess comes down to the lack of kind of financial education that we generally have, which brings in housing too.
I was we're going to be launching a property marketing strategist youth forum shortly on the cost of living, and I was reviewing some of the focus group videos yesterday, and the students that we interviewed kept saying, when I was looking for a room, when I was looking for a student room, when I was looking for a room, and I just thought, even that, I think we're miscommunicating. Why are we marketing rooms? Like we said this before, it's not a room, it's a home, it's a flat, it's accommodation. And you're right, Dan, you're belittling it. If you're reducing renting to a room, then of course it's not gonna have the respect it deserves. Really, it shouldn't be about rooms. We need to stop talking about rooms. I don't want my kids renting rooms. The room might be part of what they're renting, but actually, doesn't everybody want their loved ones to be renting a home? And that might be that, they don't rent the entire property, but that doesn't mean it's not a home. So I think even when you're looking at student accommodation, those conversations that are being had at 16, 17, 18, we're already creating negative connotations about renting.
Certainly agree. And I think what we need to do is to, the REUK, the new sort of BP, the conjoined BPF body, and ARL probably need to learn a thing or two from Ben Beadle at the National Residential Landlords Association, who is always in the headlines, always on the news. Now, partly because he's representing your typical kind of HMO residential landlords, and they're usually the ones in the news more than anyone in PBSA or BTR. But whatever he's doing, it's working because the messaging's getting out there. He's involved in Parliament and in a lot of these select committees, and I do think that we need to really consider quite how much the rents are compared to mortgages. And when I say consider, that's on landlords to do that, to make renting more attractive. And I think we're getting rid of the majority of rogue landlords. We need to institutionalize BTR, co-living, HMOs as well, make sure that we have professional operators and landlords running those. And then I think with time, we will start to change hearts and minds, and you will start to see more people happier to be renting, to get a foot on the ladder, not necessarily to get a property, but to improve your credit rating, to then live independently. And then who knows, maybe someday you could buy a house, but I think that will become less and less important.
I mean, I think this is a topic that we will continue to come back to time and time again, but the call is out there that we do need to up our game on supporting the reputation of renting in this country, definitely. We'll just have a quick break to hear from our sponsor.
Wash Station proudly sponsor this episode of Housed. We provide best-in-class laundry solutions that complement your buildings. Wash Station. Smart, green, clean.
And thanks again to Wash Station for your ongoing support. As ever with all our sponsors, we really do appreciate you engaging with us across Housed. So also out recently was Knight Frank Student Accommodation Outlook Report 2025, authored by Katie O'Neill. What were the key headlines and thoughts from this report from you both?
It's a mix of kind of investment sentiment, but there's also some student sentiment, which is fantastic to see. There's some things I think probably we all agree with, and there's some things that might be contradictory to what we've previously talked about. So a couple of those things that I've highlighted as kind of, I guess, question marks or discussion points. One of them is it states that the UK has captured a large share of global PBSA investment. Around a third of all global PBSA since 2019 has gone to the UK. It's slightly different to what we heard in the investment hub at the class conference last week, in that their view, are the experts on stage view was it's cooling in the UK, and actually there's a lot more untapped markets in Europe. So that may well be the case since 2019, but I think we will start seeing investment being deployed in different ways. Namely it's long and it's expensive to invest in the UK and to get buildings through the planning system, gateway, etc. So I think that might be a backwards look rather than a forwards look. The other thing that I thought was interesting, we have talked about this before, is they have stated that university-owned accommodation stock outperform private direct let stock. University stock rents rose 4.8% versus 0.3% for private direct let. As we've said before, that's headline rents. That doesn't account for occupancy. So whilst it looks like the rents rose, we know that there are void beds in university accommodation. So kind of their bullish approach to increasing rents isn't necessarily the full story.
It's not just that; it's the non-en-suite rooms. So there has been an increase in the non-en-suite rooms. That's primarily the university stock. There are massive voids at universities, and the Cubo keynote that I'm doing at the end of November is going to be really interesting, because I know how a lot of universities have performed, in particular the sort of tier 2 universities. So yeah, it's interesting to separate that, to say, look, universities are performing better than PBSA. I would seriously question the end results. So and the occupancy overall. So you're right to flag that, that is that's the advertised rents, not the final occupancy. Yeah, I mean, overall, this is a really good report. I think Katie O'Neill does a great job, and is very good on stage. It doesn't feel like it's been overly influenced by anyone from the sales team ultimately, and that is a real measure of the markets. I think that the word is getting through that you cannot just use the wrong student to bed ratios, or not go into the detail, or just be blindly optimistic. But I do think that we still need to be mindful of the fact that whilst they are saying that there's going to be opportunities in the sort of mid-range, we can't build in the mid-range. I think that's one of the issues that we have. We're building premium stock, filling that premium end, and then realizing that actually we need to drop prices in the premium end, even for mobilized buildings, so that we can hit 100% occupancy. There is just an affordability crunch. That's what's happening. Everyone's sliding down this affordability scale. And I think that's where, talking about the mid-range, yeah, great, but I genuinely don't, it's so difficult to build in that range and make it viable. So I think if they're looking for more, if people are looking for more development, I can't see it coming. So I think there's some serious questions that will need to be asked there.
I mean, I do want to come on to the student survey they did, because they did survey 2,500 students, and I think there's some interesting stats that we want to talk about. But I just want to come back to you, Dan, on the viability of mid-range, I guess, and we've discussed this before. Is that viability on what the current product is, in that actually we can't build what we've always built? Because one of the many conversations I had at the class conference was very much about the time is now ripe for someone to come in and just kind of tear the rule book up and try something different. And I guess that question has still not been answered to me about this viability question, is actually if we build something very different, structure it very different across the board, is that how we make it viable?
It is really tricky. And in a certain WhatsApp group, I did see some of the reasons why a lot of these properties are completely unviable. And it is more expensive to build than it's ever been, and that is the key issue. There's loads of different reasons for that, from Brexit to labour costs to utilities to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and various others. Everything has got more expensive, and that is making it a lot more difficult to build. So the only viable product is typically premium. Now, yes, I think we're primed and ready for an affordable player. But I think what will happen is that mid-range players will slide into the affordable sector. And I think they'll have no choice but to do that. And we're already seeing that with certain properties and even certain operating brands having to move down the affordability scale. It is a sliding scale. So, you fill it more at the top, and then more mid-range properties have to go to affordable. The premium stock that's already there, that's maybe 5 years old, goes into the mid-range, and everyone's kind of slides down. And I would love for there to be an opportunity to just build affordable from scratch. But what I think you'll see is that I do think the affordable sector is exciting. I think there's massive potential there, but I think the massive potential will come from universities selling old stock, and that sort of first gen stock that's the PBSA, traditional PBSA stock that's up for grabs. The likes of Sanctuary, so the Sanctuary PBSA stock that Yugo have bought or GSA have bought, that's got an opportunity there for a sustainability play and amenities play. But if you're really investing in that capex, you're going to take that from an affordable product into a mid-range product.
We lost Dan there for a second, so I'm just going to quickly go back into the 2,500 students they surveyed, because I think there's some interesting stats in there. Whereas accommodation is now a key part of university selection, where 50% said availability of accommodation influenced where they applied. Top factors when choosing accommodation was 88% said cost, 87% said quality, 86% bills included, and 85% facilities, but also 85% said value for money and 84% location. Whereas I think we generally have had a view about locations top, but actually that isn't the case anymore. 74% said peer reviews influenced their decision, which is up from 64%, which is quite a big jump. And I think one of the ones that I did want to talk about was amenities. While students expect good facilities, 83% said they preferred cheaper rent to a podcast room. And I think that is one of the biggest issues that we still have, is we're still building these amazing amenities, but actually when 88% said the top factor is cost, we really need to think about what amenities are needed. And the final one is wellbeing matters, is 75% of providers should actively support mental health. And we have done some research on this on the Youth Forum, and that isn't kind of what people are saying. So I think it's about, yes, of course, it's great if you can do it, but it's not about adding in additional cost to that. They don't want to be paying for it.
This amenity thing is baffling me, and I'd love to get a definitive answer if I'm honest, because students keep telling us that they don't want all of the amenities, and from our point of view, we kind of think, let's strip some of those out, put more rooms in, bring the rent down. But I get indications sometimes, not from everybody, that there are planners that put rules in place about the amount of communal space per student that is required. We have discussed this with people before, and I don't think any planner ever states that communal space has to be a podcast room or a roof terrace or a bowling alley. So if there are rules in place, it's up to developers and architects to decide how they use that quota. But could it just be in flats? Is that not counted as communal space? Because definitely seeing a little bit of a shift towards kind of smaller shared kitchen living rooms. It doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, have to be those kind of shared ground floor amenity spaces that are taking up space. And students are now resenting paying for them as well. It's not the fact that they don't even want them, but they're resenting them because they're not using them. So I think that's really interesting to explore, is kind of within those parameters, within those rules, what can be shifted to best suit the student.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that this is where my argument comes from, is that actually, is there a way to actually relook about how we're building these from a structural perspective to make sure they align more with affordability and actually how people live in them? I'm pretty sure there's lots of build to sell flats out there that don't have loads of amenity space built into them. So it's clearly possible under planning regulations, and we just need I just think we need to go back to the drawing board and work out what we can build and how we can build and how we can do that across everything. Across, there's still the discussion around, I know they're looking for bills included, but I think that's because there's a general belief that if it's bills included, it's cheaper, which might not be the case. So actually, if we strip out bills, do we make it cheaper? I think it's that going back. There's more research out now, so it's going back to that drawing board to fully understand that. I'm conscious of time, so I think we are going to have to move on, but I know that we will continually come back to this conversation because it's one that we need to solve, because it's the only way we are going to get the affordable beds that we need across the sector. Now we're going to go on to our Ask the Expert segment on the Renters' Rights Act that it is now, with Amanda McNeil from Howard Kennedy.
As one of the UK's largest real estate legal teams, Howard Kennedy brings deep industry insight and commercial solutions to support clients in an ever-evolving real estate landscape. We deliver tailored solutions that help our clients realise their goals, working in close collaboration to navigate every stage of the property lifecycle.
And now we'd love to welcome back Amanda McNeil from Howard Kennedy. You were with us a few months ago now when the Renters' Rights Bill was still a discussion point, and a lot has happened since then. So we thought that we would get Amanda back to now talk about what has become the Renters' Rights Act and everything that our audience should be doing, could be doing, and hopefully will be doing. So welcome back, Amanda.
Thank you very much. So, yes, a lot has happened since we last spoke. As you said, the bill has now received royal assent. That was on the 27th of October. So it is now the Renters' Rights Act. And it really is the most substantive and significant legislative changes to the private rented sector since, I think, probably the Housing Act 1988. So it is unclear when the Act will be implemented, as secondary legislation is required. However, it's expected that the most substantial reforms will be implemented in or around spring 2026. The government having indicated that they want to have a smooth transition to implementation to allow the stakeholders to prepare. That said, the additional investigatory powers of enforcement to be given to local authorities, provisions relating to certain types of tenancies for students, will come into force on the 27th of December.
Okay, so what does that actually mean for people that are working around kind of PBSA, student accommodation, build to rent, co-living, even universities? Are there any implications for them before the end of the year?
Yes. So Although the Act abolishes assured short-hold tenancies, the Act carves out an exemption for PBSAs. So private PBSA providers will be exempt from the new assured periodic tenancy regime if a tenancy is let to a full-time student at a specified educational institution where that tenancy is granted by a specified educational institution or by a specified body of persons. Alternatively, tenancies won't be assured periodic tenancies where someone acting on behalf of the landlord is a member of a specified housing management code of practice. It's not clear how these provisions will operate, as although the Act outlines this framework, there's a lot of detail that needs to be finalised. For example, what criteria will need to be met for an organisation to fall within the category of specified body of persons. That's going to be contained in secondary legislation. But what the exemption means is that PBSA landlords will be able to continue offering fixed-term tenancies aligned with the academic year, and that exemption is going to come into force on the 27th of December, as I just referenced. So where a tenancy to a student doesn't fall within that exemption under the Act, it will convert to or be an assured periodic monthly tenancy. However, what the Act has done has introduced a new ground of possession, ground 4A, and this enables landlords to seek possession of property let to full-time students where possession is required to let it to another group of full-time students. However, and importantly, landlords can only rely on ground 4A in relation to HMO properties which are let wholly to full-time students. An HMO in relation to ground 4A means a property rented to at least 3 people who are in separate households. It doesn't mean that the property has to be a licensable HMO. There is, however, a potential trap for landlords in terms of relying on ground 4A, because once the Act is enforced, the landlord must serve a written notice on the tenants within 28 days of the date the tenancy converts to a periodic tenancy. And that notice must say that the landlord wants to be able to recover possession on the basis that the tenant is a full-time student, and the landlord in turn intends to relet the premises in the future to other full-time students. If no written notice is served within the 28 days, then the landlord won't be able to rely on that ground. And then just sort of fast forwarding a bit, so the landlord served that notice, and then actually to recover possession under ground 4A, he will then have to give 4 months notice to the tenants. And it's also worth noting that unlike a traditional fixed term letting to students, where students leave at the end of the academic year, which often sort of coincides with the end of the fixed term tenancy, because these tenancies will be periodic tenancies, the tenants at any time can serve 2 months' notice to vacate. This is going to potentially cause a problem for landlords who provide student accommodation, because they could be left with a void in the middle of an academic year with very little prospect of them being able to relet during that academic year.
Thank you, Amanda. And I'm just curious, is there anything that ended up in the final act around taking upfront payments, or kind of how properties are advertised or how the rent is received?
Yes, so upfront payments are banned. You can take a holding deposit, but that holding deposit is then offset against the initial rent. In terms of advertising, what the provisions say is that you can't have a sort of a rent bidding war, in the sense that if you advertise the property for a rent at a certain amount, that's what you have to let it for. You can't then sort of start sort of having other people effectively gazumping at a higher rent. That's prohibited.
So there's a lot of new rules here, Amanda. It sounds like it could be quite onerous for landlords and operators to navigate. What are the consequences of non-compliance?
Quite significant. So Local authorities will have enforcement powers to impose penalties where there are breaches of specific statutory duties. Those duties will prohibit landlords and agents from purporting to let a dwelling for a fixed term, purporting to bring an assured periodic tenancy to an end by service of a notice to quit, or serving on the tenant of an assured periodic tenancy a purported notice of possession. Contravention of any of these duties, or the duty to give a written statement of the terms of the assured periodic tenancy before it's entered into, could result in a maximum civil penalty of £7,000 per breach. If landlords or their agents invite, encourage or accept prohibited pre-tenancy payments of rent, civil penalty of up to £5,000 per instance. Additionally, a financial penalty of up to £40,000 may be imposed where a landlord relies on a ground of possession, knowing it would not be able to obtain an order for possession on that ground. And in response to receiving a notice seeking possession on that ground, the tenant surrenders the tenancy within 4 months of that notice. The Act also extends circumstances in which rent repayment orders may be made where a landlord knowingly or recklessly misuses possession grounds or breaches a restriction on letting or marketing. Rent repayment orders will also be extended to superior landlords, so doubling the maximum penalty and effectively ensuring repeat offenders have to repay the maximum amounts. So really quite significant consequences of non-compliance.
Absolutely, and I guess that really indicates the power and the impact of this Act. It was meant to shake up rentals, and they mean it.
Yeah, and you know, really importantly, to address sort of the unscrupulous landlords and to ensure that they don't get away with sort of rogue practices.
Yeah, no, exactly that, and I'm sure the vast majority don't need to worry about any of this because they're either compliant already or will be compliant. Like you said, it's to sift out the ones that are causing a bad rental experience for tenants. And obviously, just before you leave us, Amanda, what would you say your top tips for landlords and operators would be? What should they be doing now, really?
Okay, so there's actually a lot which they can start doing. Most importantly, undertake a thorough review of your property portfolio now. Landlords currently have an opportunity to bring existing ASTs to an end if they don't wish them to be converted to assured periodic tenancies, but the window for doing so is short. So in relation to existing ASTs, a landlord is still able to serve a Section 21 notice, no fault termination. That's obviously if the current AST allows that because it's the end of the fixed term or there's a break provision. And so they can do that before the commencement date of the Act. And subsequently, they can commence possession proceedings pursuant to those notices. The existing AST will continue in those circumstances even after the commencement date of the Act. If proceedings for an order for possession under Section 21 have been commenced in reliance of such a notice by the commencement date, those proceedings will remain valid. And again, the tenancy will remain an AST until the proceedings are concluded. Similarly, if Section 21 notice has been served before the commencement date of the Act, the landlord has a 3-month window after the commencement date to issue possession proceedings. So that's the first thing that a landlord should do, is to consider whether they want to bring any existing ASTs to an end. They also need to consider whether they are able to agree rent increases now, which will take effect before the commencement date. If they can, those rent increases will be unaffected by the landlord. The landlord needs to be alert to the fact that for existing tenancies, they will be obliged by the forthcoming regulations to give their tenants written information about the changes made by the Act. And that notice needs to be given within 1 month of the commencement date. The regulations may provide for the information to be given in a prescribed form. We don't know at this stage, but really landlords need to ready themselves to be able to act quickly and to serve their notices. We referenced earlier this ban on bidding for rental properties, whereby landlords are not permitted to invite, encourage, or accept an offer exceeding the proposed advertised rent for a property. And I think to prepare for this change, what landlords should ensure that they do is retain evidence of property adverts and offers of proposed rent which they receive for properties, which can be produced, if necessary, at a later date in response to any local authority request to demonstrate compliance with these provisions once they come into force. With the Decent Home Standards and AWAB's law going to apply to the private rented sector, again, landlords should think about inspecting their properties now to identify and address any hazards and bring their properties up to the required standards, and thereby hopefully avoid any future enforcement action. Additionally, landlords can start preparing new standard forms of assured periodic tenancy agreements, which will comply with the Act. And I think probably most importantly, landlords and their employees need to really familiarise and train themselves on the notice procedures, possession and rent increase provisions, and really ensure that their internal systems are aligned with the provisions of the Act. So I think there's actually quite a lot that landlords can do now to get ready.
Yeah, absolutely. So really that kind of wait and see kind of limbo is over. There's no excuse for it anymore. We've got enough in the Act to be getting on with, even before the commencement date. So
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's so useful, Amanda. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. And obviously, this was a very, very kind of whistle-stop tour around the Renters' Rights Act. There's obviously so much more in it. So we urge any of our listeners that need advice on this to obviously get in touch with Howard Kennedy and to kind of thoroughly be prepared for what is about to come. Thank you very much, Amanda. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to My Student Halls for being our headline sponsor for the season. Your support is hugely appreciated. And of course, thank you to Utopia and Wash Station for coming on board again for season 5. We're grateful for your support. Huge thanks to Amanda from Howard Kennedy. Great advice from her, of course. Do get in touch with them if you need support for the upcoming changes. We hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we've enjoyed recording it. As ever, if you have any hot topics or ideas of what you want us to cover in season 5 across PBSA, BTR, co-living, later living, HMOs and university accommodation, do get in touch at hello@housedpodcast.com. We will see you next week.